So thank you all for coming. Of course, today is the last day for the fall. We'll start again in January, and of course I'll email everyone later and we'll announce it here at the temple as well. So of course the focus of this program is still ultimately meditation, and so today I wanted to talk about another method of practice. I think maybe, about a year ago, or last spring, maybe I mentioned it at one of the regular services. You know, sometimes I speak a little in English after those services, but this is, it's called the Naikan method. This is a method of practice that developed in Japan. Nai means within, and kan means looking. This is written with Chinese characters. And then ho actually is the last character, so Naikan ho is what they call it in Japanese. So it means the method of looking within, or the method of introspection. So it has its roots in an ascetic practice called mishirabe. I don't have a translation for that. But it was an ascetic practice that was really popular among devout Buddhists, particularly Pure Land Buddhists, probably about 100 years ago, maybe even today. I'm not sure if it's practiced today. I know the man that, who founded this particular Naikan method practiced mishirabe. So in this practice, you fast, so no food, no water, for 7 days, no sleep as well. And then you're reflecting upon your life, your relationships with other people, your parents, other family members. But there's also, somewhere in there, there's reflection upon death as well. I couldn't find a lot of information about mishirabe. It's always mentioned in relation to the method that developed from it, called Naikan. And a lot of psychologists are researching it, and I'll explain that in a moment. So there's not a whole lot of information in English on mishirabe. But as I said, this was practiced by Pure Land Buddhists. But because it relied upon one's own efforts rather than purely upon the saving grace of the Buddha Amitabha, it wasn't really recognized by the officials or authorities within the Pure Land tradition in Japan. But it was like a popular practice that was done. So then there was this man named Isshin Yoshimoto. He lived in the last century. He lived to be about 80 years old, I think. He and his wife, also Kuniko, practiced mishirabe. And his wife did it once and was successful. They say that she achieved enlightenment. I'm not sure how they're defining enlightenment in this context, but it said that the first 2 times that Isshin Yoshimoto practiced this, he failed. He couldn't complete the retreat. It was too much. And then the 3rd time, they say that he achieved enlightenment. And again, how they're defining enlightenment, I don't know. But he wanted to make this more accessible to people who weren't really interested in going without food and water and sleep for 7 days. So he ultimately created the Naikan method, and this evolved over time. So he did away with the fasting, and you can sleep if you do a Naikan retreat. And then it seems that he dropped the contemplation or meditation on death. And so it focuses more specifically on relationships. So you focus on 3 things. How have others benefited me? How have I benefited others? And how have I been a burden to others? What problems have I caused for others? Usually we spend a lot of mental energy thinking about what other people have done wrong to us. So it's this very sort of self-centered practice, right? But this is, again, focusing on our relationships with others and how we've been a burden to them, how we've benefited them, but also how they've benefited us. We spend enough time worrying about how other people have caused us harm. And so you do this for 7 days, and you're in a room behind a screen, like a folding kind of screen or something. And you sit for 15 hours a day, but there's no particular sitting posture. You don't have to sit like this. So if you're doing one of these Naikan retreats in Japan, you might, sit with your back against the wall and your knees up or something, whatever's comfortable. And then you're reflecting upon these questions, primarily in relation to other family members, usually beginning with your mother. So you go into this retreat, and you're behind the screen, and there might actually be other people in the room with you, but you don't see them because they're behind a screen as well. And then there's someone, an interviewer is what they're called, the person who is sort of leading you in this retreat. They come in and they bow outside the screen. You're behind the screen, they're outside the screen. They bow, and then they move behind the screen, and the two people bow to each other. And then the interviewer says, well, on what period of your life will you spend this time? And in relation to whom? Who are you going to think about at what age in your life, and all of that? It's a very simple question. And then you say, well, okay, I'm going to start with, for example, my mother when I was 4 years old when we first moved to Illinois. And then you just bow to one another. The interviewer leaves. He bows outside the screen by him or herself. And then he leaves. And for a couple of hours, you're behind the screen by yourself. And every 2 hours, an interviewer comes, and they say, okay, so what did you think about, basically? And then they say nothing else. They just listen. And you speak. You just tell them what you could remember. And it's about facts. It's not about feelings. You're trying to recover memories, basically. So it isn't, my mother said this to me and I felt this way about it. It's not that at all. It's, this is what I saw, this is what I said, this is what I did, and so on. And then the interviewer says, okay, so for this next period, this next 2-hour period, again, who are you going to think about, at what period of your life, and in relation to whom? And then you might think about your mother some more. It might be about your father, it might be about your siblings, or whomever. And then they leave. So you get about 20 minutes a day to bathe, and there is some break from the practice itself, about a little bit of cleaning if you go to like a retreat center. So they found, though, this is interesting, the man who founded this, Isshin Yoshimoto, he somehow was able to retire from work, I think around the age of 38. He just stopped working and decided to pursue this full time. And he was appointed as a chaplain. This is interesting for me because I'm training to be a chaplain. He was appointed as a chaplain at a juvenile detention center. I believe it was in Nara, the city of Nara in Japan. And so he started doing this practice with some of the youths who were there. And they found that it was really effective for dealing with dysfunction. And so they started experimenting at some point, and now today in Japan, this is still done as a religious practice. For some people, people who are specifically Buddhist, they do this as a religious practice. There are some people who aren't really interested in Buddhism, but they're interested in, spirituality and happiness. So like the Japanese New Age movement, it's associated with that, but then it's also practiced as a form of therapy in hospitals and medical centers, and they found that it's really effective with drug and alcohol addiction, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. If you've ever heard of schizophrenia, we normally, when we think of schizophrenia, we think of like paranoid schizophrenics who think that aliens are going to come and get them, or they might attack someone who means them no harm because they're convinced that they're watching them or trying to kill them or something. So yeah, so they say that actually 60% of schizophrenics, a friend of mine in a psychology class presentation, I think she said the statistic is that 60% of schizophrenics have dealt with some sort of trauma related to death in childhood. So you have like your brain structures and your genetics maybe predispose you for schizophrenia, but there's also some component of trauma maybe that triggers it later. And so because you're reviewing your life, maybe you're dealing with that trauma, and maybe that's why it seems to be effective with people with schizophrenia. That's sort of a side issue though. So then people who do these retreats reported, at first they had difficulty just basically recovering their memories. They found they spend a lot of time struggling at first. But then later, because they're only focused on recovering their memories, they report having a flood of memories, really vivid memories. And there's also a lot of resistance, of course, to self-criticism at first. We don't like to do that. But then that becomes easier as the retreat goes on as well. And then they also report being reborn. And they think this is because you're doing a kind of life review like someone would at the moment of death, right? As your death approaches, some people report seeing their whole life flash before their eyes. You're doing this kind of life review. And so people then have this feeling of being reborn. In fact, they call the interview time confession. There's no one to confess to. You're not asking Buddha for forgiveness for anything, and the interviewer can't give you any forgiveness. But you're revealing all of this that comes up from your memories. And so people then say that they feel relieved after doing one of these retreats. And then there's also some people who report having religious experiences, like seeing lights. And this is also the kind of light that you might see if you're having a near-death experience. Maybe you've read about this. People talk about seeing a light in the distance or a light at the end of a tunnel. People report having these sort of visions as well during this intensive retreat. So I already mentioned that it's used in therapy. So then how can we use this? I mean, it can be hard enough getting 7 days away to go do this. There are very few people who do these retreats in the West. There are a few, though. But how can we use this? So you can sit for 15 minutes in the morning reflecting on a specific person in your life in relation to these 3 questions listed above. So how have others benefited me? How have I benefited others? And how have I been a burden to others? You can just sit 5, 10, 15 minutes and think about that in that short period of time. And then at the end of the day, you sit for another 15 minutes reflecting on your interactions throughout the day in relation to these questions listed above. So for whomever you come into contact with. It's not about your family members, it's about your friends and coworkers, people here at the temple, whomever you come into contact with. Who did I benefit today? Who benefited me? And how was I a burden to people today? And in this way, we can use this practice in our daily lives. Now, of course, this came from a Buddhist ascetic practice, and it's become something that's not overtly Buddhist for a lot of people. But we can still see the Dharma, I think, in this method. So we're trying to cultivate greater empathy for others rather than being so self-centered. Greater empathy, greater compassion. And then particularly where we're thinking about how have I been a burden to others, this is very much connected to, I think, the practice of confession that we do at Buddhist temples, right? Because when we're doing all that bowing and saying those Buddha's names, when we're doing samhoi, we're supposed to be thinking about the things that we've done wrong, or at least acknowledging, even if we can't remember the things that we've done wrong, we're supposed to be acknowledging that we have caused suffering. And then we're committing ourselves not to do that anymore. So I think we can definitely see the connection with Buddhist practices that we're already doing. So sometimes people don't really like to sit in meditation. They don't like to try and concentrate on the breath or anything. They get frustrated because it's not active enough. But this can give some structure to our practice and actually bring some fairly immediate benefit to our lives now by improving our relationships with others. So I think this is a really good practice to do. If you're interested in doing it, I think it's a good practice to do. Huh?
Stay in the room for 7 days and you learn a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, if you can do a retreat, that's fantastic. But if you can't do a retreat, you can do it, 5, 10, 15 minutes in the morning, 5, 10, 15 minutes in the evening. Yeah. So I learned about this, of course, because of my studies in psychology. I saw an advertisement for a conference where a Western Buddhist practitioner who also happens to be a psychologist was presenting on this, and I had never heard of it before. I lived in Japan, I had never heard of it before. So then I started doing some research on it, but I wanted to share this with you today. So, this was a short one today. Do you have any questions about this or anything else you'd like to ask about?
So the last thing, the only one to ask.
That's all right. That's all right.
So this is the Japanese method?
Well, it evolved in Japan, yeah. Yeah. So we could call it a Japanese method. But it's slowly spreading outside of Japan. Slowly, slowly. But more as a form of therapy. You know, psychologists are researching this kind of thing. It's, I'm not aware of anyone doing this in the West specifically as a Buddhist practice. But in Japan, some people do it as therapy, some as sort of New Age spirituality, and some as actual Buddhist practice. Yeah. Yes?
Do you mean the Samhoi Sutra, and we recall out to like about 108 Buddha names? Did the Buddha back in the time talk about all these Buddha names, or how did all these Buddha names come up into the sutra?
I have no idea. I have no idea. My suspicion is that these kind of practices evolved over time. But just because the Buddha didn't use a particular method doesn't mean that it's not Buddhist. As long as it's... go ahead.
Do you think it's developed later in China?
Probably. Probably. But then I can't say for sure. I can't say for sure. Or maybe later in India, and then it went to China, or in China itself. I'm not really sure. I do know that there are sutras attributed to the Buddha that are about filial piety. Do you know that term? It's about children honoring their parents. And the sutra revolves around that.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what is it? Could you say that louder? Okay. Researchers say that these sutras were probably written in China. I think maybe there's one specific sutra, but there may be more. That these were probably written in China under Confucian influence. But I'm not an expert.
Confession, the Buddha name, with the 108 Buddha name. I think, as I know, they took from the name from the one sutra. The name of the Buddha in one sutra. Get to bow.
Oh, to do that practice? Okay.
To confess before the Buddha.
So it probably depends on when. So Nyapa Kwak just said that the 108 Buddha names, when we're doing Samhoi, that those were taken from one particular sutra. So it probably depends on when that sutra was written down exactly, because originally Buddhism was an oral tradition, and then they started writing things down later. So probably it depends on when that sutra was written, and then sometime after that, that was pulled out. So yeah, it's probably a later development. Yes?
I think that method relate to the Buddhist too, Buddhism, because as the Naikan, that means reflection, look back into your mind.
Yes.
So the story about the Bodhidharma, talking with the second, but I mean the
second patriarch?
Patriarch, yes. Because you know the second patriarch asked the Bodhidharma about the calm the mind. The Bodhidharma told him back, come back to your mind to see, you find your mind.
Yeah, look at your own mind.
Look your mind. That's
yes.
Naikan too.
Oh yes.
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 Relate to Buddhism.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Buddhism is all about looking at the mind.
Yes.
Ultimately, it's all about looking at the mind. And then seeing where we're, as I always say, off the path, or where we're on the path, and trying to stay on the path. And then trying to act, speak and act in the world according to that Buddhist mind that we've developed. Yeah. And so we have to look in. We have to look inside, look inside, look inside. Yes?
I want to ask you three questions. Okay. In the morning, it's 11 o'clock. Okay. So we have Vietnamese way called it Hilfa. How in English?
Dharma talk.
Dharma talk.
Dharma.
Dharma talk.
Dharma talk. Okay. And then at 12 o'clock we are the Buddha. I don't know how to call it, but Catholics call it the Mass.
Oh, we would, I don't know if there is one word. You could just call it, we have our service. Services. Or chanting. Chanting, you know, we're going, like we do in English before, you know, at the beginning of this program each week. We're doing, you know, the Heart Sutra and Namo Amitabha Buddha. That's chanting, that action, we call it chanting. 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 Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then after this, so we go in the back there and we have to have ceremony for the dead people. How to call it in English?
We could call those memorial prayers. Memorial prayers. Or memorial chanting. Yeah.
How do you spell chanting? C-H-A-N-T or
C-H-A-N-T-I-N-G. Chanting. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What do you think about the future Buddhism in America?
What do I think about the future of Buddhism in America? That's an excellent question. Buddhism in America is still in transition. Some people say that we have American Buddhism already. I don't think so. I think we're still in transition. Things are changing so much. Of course, even in Japan and Vietnam, if you look over just the past 100 years, you see a lot of change. Buddhism 100 years ago in Japan or 100 years ago in Vietnam is not the same as it is today. But still, I think there's more continuity because it has much deeper roots. In America, we're still experimenting. And then in America, we also have the different national forms of Buddhism from all over the world here together mixing. And that's going to create more change. In fact, I think you know, people who research religion, sociologists and anthropologists, they say it takes 300 years for a religion introduced into a new culture. It takes 300 years before that new religion becomes really part of that culture. And officially, we say Buddhism has been in the West, or in America at least, for a little over 100 years. So we've got about 200 more years to go before we can really think about American Buddhism, I think. Of course, Buddhism was present in Hawaii more than 100 years ago because of Asian immigrants, a lot from Japan and Hawaii and China here on the West Coast. But for it to be introduced to Western American culture, it's officially been a little over 100 years. So yeah, we've got a ways to go. So I think on the one hand, because we live in a free society, there's a lot of hope. Buddhism in much of Asia is not in a healthy situation. In Tibet and Vietnam, in North Korea, South Korea, it's doing okay. In Japan, things are not healthy in Japan. I can't tell you, I meet Japanese priests all the time. They themselves tell me Japanese Buddhism is empty now. It's a funeral religion. The priests there are not really, generally, they're not well trained in Dharma. They're the sons of other priests, and they're trained in ritual, mostly performing funerals. That's it. Although there are, definitely there are real Buddhist practitioners and genuine masters in Japan. I'm not saying that they're not, but we think, Japan is a Buddhist country, but it's not in a healthy situation. So, the fact that we live in a free society, I think there's a lot of hope for the Dharma here. At the same time, I see a lot of gaps in the Dharma in America. So among Western Buddhist teachers, and even Western Buddhist teachers are beginning to see this now, they learn meditation and some basic ritual, but they don't always know the Dharma really well. Particularly some traditions of Zen are anti-academic. So, which personally I think is a problem, because then, people get their own ideas, and it sounds like a good idea, and so then they say, well, that's Buddhism, that's the Buddhist teaching, and it's not. So I think that for the future of Buddhism in America, we need meditation masters and really good practitioner scholars. There are a lot of Buddhist studies PhDs, scholars working at universities. They're not necessarily Buddhist. They're sort of looking at it from the outside in. That's changing a little bit. But we need more, Buddhist practitioner scholars and meditation masters and people doing social service work. We need a more well-rounded community. It's starting to happen. It's starting to happen, but I just think it's going to take time.
So how do we make sure that we have this? Because it seems like, it seems we have too many individual groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see it's really hard to attract a lot of people, or want to study or do research and
mm-hmm.
want to really devote themselves into the Dharma learning, and especially to the Westerners. It's still very new, and I have a lot of friends, Americans, that they really have the idea, but not really, they want to know, want to learn. So I thought it's very interesting to see that it will be expanded to the Westerners, not just stay in the Asian community.
Well, they actually, I think they say about a quarter of the Buddhists in America are converts like me. So it already is taking root. I just think it's going to be a couple hundred years before we can really see what the result of all this mixing and all these different traditions coming together and the new things that some converts are doing, and I think it'll be a couple hundred years before we see the result. So I think there's a tremendous amount of hope for Buddhism in America, but it remains to be seen where it's going to go. Yeah.
Is there any center for international Buddhism center here in LA that all Buddhists can come and invite guests to speak for their own sects, so we understand a little bit more about outside of different branches?
Different branches of Buddhism? I don't know of one international center, but there's Buddhism from all over the world right here in Los Angeles. So some students from our University of the West, recently went to a place in Escondido down near San Diego, and it's a Theravada monastery, but it's run by Western monks who've been training for decades. I wish I could remember. I think it's Metta Forest Monastery. I think that's what it's called. And of course, there are, just here in the Los Angeles area, you've got Japanese temples and Chinese temples, and there's a place called Insight LA. It's an insight meditation center. They're I think they're a little bit less Buddhist and more like secular meditation. I think. I'm not really sure. So I think, there's not one place where you can go and learn about all the different kinds of Buddhism, but there are lots of different kinds of Buddhism are within easy reach. So you could go to different places in the Los Angeles area if you want to experience different forms of Buddhism. I think the problem with having like one Buddhist temple for everyone is that the chanting is done in dozens of different languages. even within different national traditions. From what I understand, in Vietnam, the monasteries in the north chant a little bit differently than in the center, and they're different from the south. The tradition's a little different here and there. I have friends who practice Tibetan Buddhism, and I see things that they're doing for just basic daily prayers, and I've never seen it before. And then I show them some of my stuff, you know, and they're like, "What is this?" You know, so all that diversity is wonderful, but then it also contributes to kind of keeping us separated a little bit too. I kind of like the diversity, but yeah, so you would have to go to a variety of different places to learn about the different forms of Buddhism.
Sorry, I have one more question. I know that last year Thầy Anglit mentioned that he would like to take the Buddhists here to go for a tour. It's normally where traditionally that right at the New Year, the Lunar New Year, and our monks here would like to take all the visitors, and we go around LA and visit each temple. And Thầy Anglit mentioned last year that he would like for us to explore ourselves to outside the Vietnamese communities, to go see all other Zen centers.
Yeah, Japanese Soto.
I don't think it happened last year. Did he take us, or he would like to talk to most Venerable Thich Lee? I wonder if you can, you know, wonder if we can do that. I never done it before, but I would like to see other temples beside Asian temples. You know.
I think we could look into it. I don't know. Not all of the Buddhist traditions celebrate the Chinese Lunar New Year, so I don't know if that would necessarily be the time to do it. And we also wouldn't be seeing their normal practice if they do, because like here at the temple, people are coming in and out all day, and there's the bell ringing, the bell here ringing, and it's a little different than what's normal. So it might be possible to arrange some smaller group kind of things, like one Saturday going this place and another day going another place. I'll talk to Venerable Anduk about it, Most Venerable Anduk about it.
Or you can, if you have time. I mean, we don't want to ask for more time, viewers, but what if we can take our group to go somewhere and practice something different?
But you have to contact with the temple first.
Yeah, we'll have to make arrangements. I'll look into it. I'll think about it.
I know that you go to the one in. You mentioned that every Sunday you go to the temple in...
Oh yeah, once or twice a month I go to a Korean temple in Anaheim. Our group would not fit in that temple. It's so small. It's a tiny house temple, and the living room, it's too small for that particular temple. But there may be other Korean temples. There are some larger ones that we could maybe arrange to visit. There's a beautiful Thai temple sort of northwest of LA. I think it's called Wat Thai. That's a really nice place to go to. And monks from this temple go and in May every year for a Friday night, usually it's a Friday night Buddha's birthday celebration at a different Thai temple, the Dhammakaya temple in Azusa. It's not very far from Bao Phap. Yeah, I think it's not very far from Bao Phap. Yeah.
Because as Guan Yin talked about last lunar year exactly, we have the pilgrimage to the in LA we have a pilgrimage to Soto Zen Buddhism.
Okay.
And one temple that's Avalokitapura over Koreans.
Kwanum-sa. In Korea, yeah, okay, I've been there. Yeah.
We was in, Thai temple. You mentioned Ajusa.
So you did do a little mini pilgrimage to those places.
We have only 20 or 25 minutes in the temple, and they show just a little bit and talk a little bit. But at Guan Yin, intend to listen more and understand more about their culture and what the practice belong to another culture. Rather than Vietnamese.
Okay.
That's why he asked you a question about that. Because you need more understand about Buddhism in our culture like Japan, Japanese, Koreans, and Thailand,
Okay.
Burma. We did go to Burma temple, Thailand, Cambodia, or something.
Okay.
Theravada and Mahayana.
Yeah, maybe we can arrange to spend a little bit longer time at one place for like one morning and then go to a different place. Okay, I'll look into it. We'll see what we can do.
More time to talk.
Yeah.
They show us how to do the practice.
Yeah.
In the, that's a tradition.
Okay. Okay, I'll look into it. Thank you for raising that. Let me double check the time here. Okay. Let's get started with our meditation.